he just canceled all his shows.
And gang member no more.
Nah, ain't nothing.
That's what Shotty need to make sure he do.
Nah,
Tell that nigga that he's not a gang member no more. He kicked out the wood. He was never a gang member. And Shotty need to expose him.
this shit crazy, son. But he doing that to make K9 think he don't got no relationship with Boy. That's what he trying to do. He trying to separate the show.
That's cool, but now you gotta get violated.
Yeah, super violated. Super.
The situation around Jim Jones has reached a point where people can no longer ignore the patterns that have been building for years, and this new police footage has only made the conversation louder. When people watched the clip of him talking to officers during the traffic stop and then combined it with everything from the past, the questions about his street image returned stronger than ever. For a long time, folks in New York and across the hip-hop world have whispered about Jim Jones and how he handles real pressure, especially when police are involved. The new footage shows him explaining his side of what happened, saying the car was not his, saying he would never put himself in danger like that, and reacting in a way that many people did not expect from someone who spent years building a tough street persona. That is why the conversation has exploded again, because when someone calls themselves a gang member, a writer, a real street guy, people start comparing their words to their actions. This new clip is one more moment added to a long timeline, and people are lining everything up to see what really matches and what does not. When you go back through the years, you see how this situation did not come out of nowhere. The streets still remember the wiretaps that caught everybody off guard when the whole 9 Trey situation happened with 6ix9ine. That phone call has never disappeared from people's minds, because on that call, you hear Jim Jones telling others that 6ix9ine had to be violated and that he was no longer considered a gang member. After that call leaked, people looked at the situation sideways, because everyone else involved in that whole moment ended up getting arrested except for him. That moment made a lot of people raise their eyebrows, and every time new footage drops, the old questions come back stronger. People are not saying he told on anybody outright, but they keep asking how one person keeps sliding out of situations that should have been much heavier. When someone pushes an image of being a high-ranking street guy, the expectations become different, and that is why the pressure around him keeps increasing. Then you add the airport clip into the conversation, and everything becomes even more interesting. In that video, Jim Jones is talking to officers, explaining that 2 men jumped him, telling the officers everything that happened step by step, and saying he did nothing wrong. For a regular person, that reaction makes perfect sense. Anybody who gets approached by police would want to explain what happened to avoid trouble. But when someone calls themselves a gang member, especially someone who claimed to follow certain rules and codes, the reaction feels different. People who grew up around the streets know that the usual response when police show up is to stay quiet, say nothing, and wait for a lawyer. That is how most people who live that lifestyle were taught to move. So when they see someone explaining every detail in front of officers, it does not match the image that has been pushed for years. The reason people are confused is because the actions do not line up with the street rules that he once represented so strongly. For years, Jim Jones showed himself as a tough figure, someone who lived the street life, someone who followed gang rules, someone who represented New York in a hard way. But the issue is that when real pressure shows up, the reactions you see on camera do not match that same tough image. This has caused people to break down every moment more carefully, especially now that body cameras and leaked footage make it almost impossible to hide anything. When these moments hit the internet, they get replayed and analyzed from every angle, and street people start asking if the persona is real or just a character made for TV and social media. One thing that keeps coming back is how often Jim Jones says things to the police that regular street guys would never say. When he told the officer that the car was not his, people immediately said that he was pointing the blame toward the driver because that is how the officers usually take it. When nobody claims anything found in a car, the police usually take everyone in until someone steps up. That is how it normally works. But when someone says, "That is not mine," the officer hears that as, "It must belong to someone else in the car." In the street world, that type of behavior is heavily frowned upon because it goes against everything the so-called rules say. And when the officer said that everyone was getting charged, you could hear the frustration and confusion in Jim's voice. People caught that instantly because many believe that someone who fully lived the street life would not be reacting this way on camera. The Georgia arrest situation is another major part of why people keep watching him so closely. Deputies said they found drugs and a stolen gun in the car he was in, and he was sitting right in the back where they found the weapon. Everybody in the car was taken in, and everybody faced charges. But what caught people's attention was how the situation ended with him walking away without the long sentence many expected. People were shocked at how smooth everything went for him in court and how quickly the situation disappeared. Ever since then, people from New York to Atlanta have asked whether something else was happening behind the scenes because the outcome did not match what usually happens in similar cases. Every time something like this happens, people who grew up in the street lifestyle compare their own experiences to what they see on video. Most street guys will tell you that when police pull up and start asking questions, the last thing you do is start talking. You either ask if you are under arrest or you stay silent until a lawyer arrives. That is the code many were raised on. Talking too much can get someone in trouble, and staying quiet protects everyone. But in the clips involving Jim Jones, you constantly hear him explaining things, telling officers the story from start to finish, saying who did what, saying where things were found, and trying to convince them that he had nothing to do with it. That style of talking makes a lot of people question the authenticity of his tough image, because it does not match what a street veteran would normally do. People also bring up moments from his reality TV days, when he would act tough, but only toward people who were not part of the street world. Many recall how he pressed regular civilians on camera, yet when it came to real street pressure or federal situations, the energy shifted completely. Because of that, people believe his persona was built more for entertainment and image than for real street credibility. And when you mix that with the new footage, it becomes even harder for him to keep that reputation going. The more clips that come out, the more people begin to believe that he might be more of a performer than a real street figure. Another reason the conversation has become so loud is because people around him have said things in the past that did not help his case. When the wiretap leaked and you could hear him talking about 6ix9ine needing to be violated, people said that if that call came from anyone else, the consequences would have been different. Even people inside the 9 Trace circle pointed out that it was strange how he was not brought into the case, especially when his voice was clearly on the recording. People also remembered times he would speak on gang life publicly and questioned why someone who claimed that lifestyle would be so open with certain details. All of these things have stacked up over time, creating a cloud of suspicion around him. And now, with the newest footage showing him talking to police again, the questions have reached a level where fans and street people cannot ignore it. People on social media, YouTube, and forums have spent hours breaking down every word he said in the clips. They point out that he keeps telling officers that the car is not his, that he has been in the game too long to put himself at risk, and that he would never have a gun or drugs in the car. People ask why someone who claims to be tough would even feel the need to say all of that in front of officers. They compare it to how real gang members handle situations and notice the difference instantly. That is the core of the whole conversation. This is not about whether he is innocent or guilty. This is about whether his actions match the image he has pushed for nearly 2 decades. If someone refuses to stay silent and instead talks their way through police encounters every time, it creates a major disconnect, and the street world pays attention to that. They look at every detail, every word, every movement, and they decide whether someone is really who they say they are. When the footage shows someone behaving differently from the rules they promoted, people start questioning everything. As more people rewatch the footage of Jim Jones in different situations with law enforcement, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. It is not just one moment or one traffic stop. It is a collection of clips, interviews, wiretaps, airport incidents, backstage encounters, and behind-the-scenes stories that all point in the same direction. Every time something goes left, the reaction looks more like someone trying to clear their own name than someone standing firm on the codes he used to speak about. This is why older street guys, especially those who come from the era where silence was everything, say they cannot take him seriously anymore. They spent decades watching people go down for far less, and they know how unforgiving the system can be when someone has a reputation tied to gangs, violence, and criminal networks. Yet somehow, Jim always seems to slide past the consequences in ways that do not align with the normal reality of someone who claims his lifestyle. For years, he built a foundation on the idea that he was one of the toughest figures in Harlem. Someone who survived countless conflicts, someone who knew how to move carefully, and someone who could stand on his business without hesitation. That is the image fans grew up seeing. But when the cameras from these police encounters appear, that image starts cracking in places that are difficult to repair. The tone of his voice, the urgency in his explanations, the shock when officers say everyone will be charged. All of that exposes a different side that most fans were not meant to see. And because these interactions are not edited or controlled, people get to see the raw, unfiltered version of him in those tense moments. They hear every excuse, every attempt to distance himself from responsibility, and every moment where he tries to convince the officers he is innocent. It is a completely different energy from the one he uses on social media, in interviews, and in music videos. People in the culture pay attention to contradictions, because contradiction is the quickest way to expose a person's real intentions. If someone says they are a street general, but panics during police questioning, that contradiction becomes louder than any song or interview ever could. And once the streets spot those contradictions, it is almost impossible to rebuild that image. This is why people look at him now with a level of doubt that was not there a decade ago. Back then, his name carried weight because of Dipset, his affiliation with powerful figures, and the stories he told about his upbringing. But now, when people look at the full picture, his reputation is rooted more in performance than reality. Another element that has made the conversation even louder is how he responds to criticism. Instead of ignoring it, letting it fade away, or addressing it in a calm, logical way, he often becomes defensive and emotional when people question his street credibility. He calls people haters, he tries to remind everyone that he has done more than others, and he constantly repeats that he has been solid for decades. But the people asking questions do not care about stories from the past. They care about the footage they can see right now. And the footage does not lie. The footage shows someone who talks too much during police encounters, someone who tries to remove himself from responsibility at the first sign of pressure, and someone who reacts like a regular citizen instead of a hardened street veteran. This is not saying that a person should throw their life away by staying silent if they truly have nothing to do with the situation. That is not the argument here. The argument is that Jim Jones built his entire public image on the idea that he lived by a certain set of rules. Rules that demand silence, loyalty, unshakable composure, and total responsibility for whoever is in your circle. But when the moments come where those rules should apply, the behavior does not match. For someone claiming street leadership, talking to the police should never be the first instinct. Trying to explain yourself should not be the first reaction. Moving like a regular civilian contradicts the idea of being a street general, and that contradiction is what creates the noise. Longtime New York insiders say that the biggest red flag is how he consistently avoids major consequences despite being involved in situations that usually destroy careers and lives. When the 9 Trey case exploded, everybody involved went down. People who had nothing close to his fame or influence were sitting in court facing heavy time. Prosecutors brought up every phone call, every message, and every piece of evidence they had. And in the middle of all that, there was Jim Jones's voice talking about violating 6ix9ine, a recorded call that shocked everyone. But when the indictments were handed out, his name was nowhere on the list. That moment alone was enough to make people question everything. The public never got an explanation, and the prosecutors never clarified why he was spared. That silence around the situation is exactly why the speculation has never died. Another thing people point out is how many of his closest associates suffered far worse consequences than he did. Max B went down and got a sentence so heavy that fans thought he would never come home. Mel Matrix went down. Other members of groups around him faced serious charges. But somehow, every time one of these circles collapsed, Jim came out with nothing but minor scratches. In the street community, that kind of luck does not happen by accident. When one person constantly walks away unharmed while everyone else falls, people begin to suspect protection, cooperation, or some form of behind-the-scenes arrangement. And even if none of that is true, the pattern alone is enough to destroy a person's street credibility. The body cam footage from the Georgia arrest only makes things worse because it shows how quickly he tries to separate himself from the driver and everyone else in the car. He repeatedly says, "I don't know anything, that's not mine, and I would never put myself in that situation." For someone who once claimed to be part of a brotherhood, the reaction looked like someone focused on saving his own skin before considering the people around him. People who live in the street world always say you move as a unit, you go down as a unit, and you rise as a unit. Even if someone is innocent, the code says you do not throw anyone else under the bus to protect yourself. That type of behavior is considered the exact opposite of loyalty. And when fans watched that footage, they saw a man who was more concerned with proving his innocence than protecting the people who were with him. The reaction he had when officers said everyone would be charged was another moment that stood out. His voice shifted, his tone changed, and you could see the panic rise. That was not the reaction of someone who spent years claiming to be built for this lifestyle. It was the reaction of someone who never expected to face real consequences. That is why the clip went viral. People finally got a chance to see the real Jim Jones, not the rapper, not the Dipset member, not the tough guy from Harlem, but the human being confronted by the reality of law enforcement. And in that moment, the persona fell apart. Street communities take these things seriously because credibility is currency in that world. If people do not trust you, you have no value. If people think you might fold under pressure, you cannot lead. If people think you talk too much, they will not include you in anything serious. That is why the conversation around him matters so much right now. People are not just teasing him or trying to pick apart his image, they are trying to determine whether he ever lived the life he claimed to live. And the more footage that comes out, the more people believe the truth is very different from the story he built. Even rappers who once respected him have changed their tone over the years. You rarely hear major New York artists call him a street legend anymore. His name does not carry the same respect it once did. And whenever he tries to remind people of what he contributed to the culture, the answer is always the same. That may be true, but why do these police videos look like this? Once the streets put a stain on your name, it is almost impossible to wash it away. The biggest problem for Jim Jones right now is not the footage itself, it's the timing. The internet has created a world where nothing disappears. Every clip, every audio recording, every past moment can be replayed instantly. And in this era, people can analyze every second in slow motion. They can break down facial expressions, tone of voice, and body language. And when they compare these real moments to the image he tries to maintain online, the gap becomes too wide to ignore. That is why this new police body cam footage